Seb, I'm really pleased to have this opportunity and sit and talk to you, especially with how busy things have been over the last couple of months with the Euros and you being out in Germany. So, how have things been?
Yeah, very good, and thanks for having me on. Yeah, I mean, the summer it just rolled so quickly from the Premier League into the Euros. I have to say, the Euros flew by,
Yeah.
absolutely flew by. I think international tournaments do that because I enjoy them so much. They're my favourite thing to work on, absolutely no doubt about it. We can get into that, the reasons why that is later, but they are. I think it's the also well partly the condensed nature of it as well means you just fly into it, you get caught up, you go with this football train, and then it comes to a stop, and you get off, and you think, oh, just need a little break now.
Yeah, no rest for the wicked though, right? You're straight back in with the new season though.
Absolutely, I think that the EFL has started this weekend, just gone, and my first game with Sky for the season will be Leeds against Middlesbrough in the League Cup in midweek. And this is the thing, you just think it's crazy when teams win trophies at the back end of the season and supporters might have a moment at the back end of the season which is gutting for them. You think of Leeds United missing out on promotion, and to think just a matter of weeks later they're back on it again to try and get where they want to be, which is oh, there you go, there goes my mic, which is the Premier League. So, and in Leeds' case is where they feel they belong. I mean, what clubs don't, but I think particularly Leeds are one of those.
I wanted to take you back to when I first met you, which was a couple of years ago now, I think, before a Lionesses game. They were playing Japan out in Spain, and we were working from London.
Mm.
I was running at the time, and when I come and greeted you, like most people, once they hear the accent, you ask me red or blue. Um, I told you I was a blue, and one of the things that you said to me stuck with me. Um, Rather than sort of dive straight in analysing the predicament that the club were in the boardroom or what it was like on the pitch at the time. Yeah, I remember you said to me, Goodison Park does not belong in the Championship. Goodison Park is a Premier League ground. Um, so I wanted to get things rolling by asking, and this isn't limited to the UK, obviously, as you've just been out in Germany. Are there any football stadiums that have left a lasting impression on you?
I mean, there's so many. I mean, the thing with me, any ground I go to, I get caught up in where I am, how important this ground is. I think particularly the grounds that I'd say the newer grounds, or I'd say grounds that have been built since I've been working, or even actually probably I'd say since being an adult. I would say any grounds that have been built while I've been an adult. It's a different kind of impression. When I think of Spurs' stadium, for example, it's a wow stadium. Um, because it has amazing facilities, great view. It's probably, from that side of things, the best stadium in the country. But that's because it's the newest, really.
Mhm.
And that's always going to be the case. So, as far as facilities within the stadium itself, and even the fan experience is right up there. If you're going to see a concert there or going to see an NFL game and everything else, you can't complain about that arena. But the older stadiums just do it for me because they remember one thing, which I think a lot of newer stadiums try to go for and do forget a little bit. But it's that aspect of being a supporter in the ground and being part of the action. It's not a spectacle to look at. For me, football, and I suppose this is quite a commercial thing, but a lot of time when people think of big concerts or big sporting events, people will pay a lot of money to be in seats that are really far away from the action, but can oversee the action. They can oversee the whole spectacle when they think, I'm at a big event, but you don't feel part of it. There's nothing better than being ringside at a boxing match. And it's so different to being ringside at a boxing match and being way at the back. And it's because you actually feel that sport. And that's why some of the fans that go to every game, a lot of them are behind the goal because they want, why they might not see bigger picture of the play, they feel part of the action. Anytime there's a corner at their end, everything else, they're so engaged with it. And one of the non-league teams near me, Spalding United, I went to watch them on Saturday and took my daughter there. And it reminds you again of, even at that level, you it doesn't nothing beats being right next to the pitch. And any stadium where I can be as close to the pitch as possible, I would take that actually over having a greater view of the whole pitch. Because with my commentary, I like to feel part of the action, and not every ground gives you that actually in the Premier League at the moment. But I have to say, Goodison is one of the grounds that does give me that. I think it's because of the position of the gantry. There's two gantries there, and one of them you are almost hanging off the top of the roof, effectively, which is the traditional gantry position. And you have to almost go on the roof of the stadium to get to that position. I don't know if you've had a chance to do that, Max, but it's a nice thing to do. And you can look over Stanley Park, and for a moment when you're on top of the roof, you can't really hear anything in the ground. There's almost a silence, and it's a feeling we think, all the things that are happening below me, all the people that are below me, expectant, waiting for the action on the pitch, that are excited to be there. I mean, I say excited to be there. It depends on the situation in the season. But and then you go out and you're hanging over the fans. The fans are beneath you, and you are fairly close to the pitch. And then there's another position which is in front of the fans, but right next to the pitch side, which we used a lot during COVID. And it's actually a position that Premier League productions, if ever I'm working for them or when they're in attendance, they will use that position. But if I'm at Goodison for a live Sky game or say an FA Cup game, I'll be in that higher one. But either one is great. And there's a few grounds in the Premier League that give you that. Manchester United, Old Trafford gives you that.
Yeah.
Luton had it last season, weirdly, not so much with the fans, but being close to the pitch, right next to the action. So it was a bit of a shame that they went down, but that position that they set up was perfect. It was the best, from a commentary point of view, it was the best position in the league. And I knew as the season was going on, I thought, well, I need to enjoy it now because it might be gone quite quickly. And I'd say there's any stadium. So when a new team is promoted, and Portman Road, I actually haven't been to that commentary position, but because it's one of the older grounds, I'm expecting it to be an interesting one, because sometimes they can go either way. You can find yourself in a really weird position, or you can find yourself in a fantastic position. The newer stadiums tend to be quite uniform. You more or less feel like you're going to be able to see the whole pitch and see the whole stadium, but not necessarily be that close to the action. And some of the new ones obviously suffer from that sort of situation. I think the new position at Anfield, you're quite, even though you can see most of the pitch, you do feel slightly withdrawn. Certainly at West Ham, London Stadium, Arsenal and Manchester City, you have the supporters. The position's actually not bad, but the supporters are right behind you. So literally there are fans here at those two grounds, which is fine for me, but sometimes it depends on who your co-com is. It can get a bit interesting depending on the state of the game. And every team, I could go through every team all the time, and you have this situation. But I would say old school grounds where the gantry is in a more traditional position, certainly the best.
I would certainly agree with that. And I mean, obviously, I haven't been up in the gantry, but since in my couple of years working, I've had the fortune of to work at Anfield and at Old Trafford pitch side. It's interesting that you say that about Old Trafford, because for all the scrutiny that it comes under, it certainly still seems like one of those grounds that hasn't lost its magic, and that you feel the history of the place. Is it the same for you in the gantry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing about Manchester United is they've gone through this funny period where, I mean, growing up, I was used to seeing them winning all the time. That's what you expected to happen. But they found themselves usurped by their neighbours, which must hurt a bit. They've seen their other great rivals have success in that time as well, and they've always remained popular in this time. I don't think they're losing support necessarily, but they do seem to be in a slight panic mode the way they operate. And by that I mean they know they have to maintain that standard of being, inverted commas, the biggest club on the planet. To do that, you have to make statement signings every summer to maintain that status, because that's part of the package. You're the club that goes out and gets the biggest name footballers. But weirdly, they're in a position where I don't think they need that right now. And they need to probably be adopting an approach which is a bit more sensible. But they can't afford to do it, really, because in this era with financial regulation, which speaking to an Everton supporter, you maybe don't want to speak about, but in Manchester United's position is they are one of the few clubs that do have that room to spend because of being that commercial beast.
Yeah.
But to be that commercial beast, you have to either be winning all the time, and if you're not winning all the time, you have to be signing the big names. I don't think you can sit out of the limelight for too long not doing either of those things and expect to feel like you're going to rush back to the top table. I think of like Juventus, for example. They've struggled to get back to that top table. Once you drop off it in the modern era, I mean, AC Milan had the same issue. There's no divine right that you're going to be always there in this modern game. Getting onto more deeper issues about that sort of stuff.
A standout ground for me, and it would fall under the bracket of more modern grounds. And I wasn't working there. I just had the fortune of being able to get a ticket and to go out to Germany and watch a game there. Was the Allianz Arena in Munich. I'm very fortunate to have the time to go out there and see the semi-final between Spain and France, and it was just an absolute spectacle. You know, on approach, walking down from the train station. A gorgeous ground from both the outside and in. Fan experience, top notch, and the game itself, Lamine Yamal scoring that goal, it wasn't too bad.
That's the game that I covered that game, and it was absolutely fantastic. It's what you're in the business for, games like that. You know, two great football powers, some great players on the pitch, young talent coming through and stealing the spotlight. And yeah, the stadium is. I mean, Germany, they get so much right in terms of the fan experience. They've almost thought to themselves, well, we won't try and be the league that attracts all the biggest names to it. I mean, Bayern do give that a go, but they've thought about the idea of what's the most important thing about football is supporters and their experience of the ground. And I always find it funny when I go to watch football in Germany, because I think to myself, I think a lot of supporters in Britain, that is the template they want really deep down. They want to be able to go to a ground where the tickets are reasonably priced, but they've got a great seat. They can drink in the stands. They can get food in the stands. And in many ways, their clubs have not been sold off. They feel that they're still part of that, those decision makings and everything else. Well, how much of that is true in reality is another matter. But if fans feel that way and they have a voice, then they feel more connected with their club. I think in England we had this situation where the Premier League is a huge success and it's a wonderful league with great players in it. But I suppose the ownership of the clubs is something that most supporters aren't totally comfortable with, I would say, on the whole. But they can't really see another way, because you're basically then saying, okay, well, if we don't want this, then we lose all these players that we want to watch every week. It's a very difficult scenario. It's a victim of his own success, really, the Premier League in that regard. And it is one of the country's best success stories, honestly. But from a German point of view, the Allianz was the best commentary position that I had in the tournament. Fantastic. And you think it's not, yeah, it's a modern stadium by the metric I was going with earlier, but it's one of those ones that have got it nailed on in terms of, from that media point of view, that position was fantastic. Now I can't. You said you went there as just to watch a game, and it was amazing anyway. So I think most of the German grounds, every German ground I went to, I went, oh, this is a proper ground. Or this is, this is a proper big teams in play in these clubs. So it's amazing how these great grand grounds and half the clubs are in the second tier, which also points towards the competitiveness of their system now. In that you can suffer quite quickly. I mean, Bayern are almost exempt from that, and maybe Dortmund are, but every other club is vulnerable, and we've seen that. Some huge German clubs have been relegated in recent years. I think the English system at the moment, as it's set now, you're not going to lose. There's probably 8 or 9 clubs in that league, and are not going anywhere anytime soon. Won't even be under threat from it in their current state. But in Germany, you just feel that any team, bar Bayern, if they get it wrong, even Leverkusen, if they get it wrong, they could just plummet down the league and all of a sudden find themselves in the second tier. But yeah, wonderful experiences in those stadiums. The Dortmund Stadium is just a fantastic experience. Although the sun was right in my eyes for the games I did there. It's not. I don't think that's Dortmund's fault, to be honest. But yeah, if I was to tell anybody, if you go anywhere in Europe and have a proper experience of football, and a proper ground, a big club, Dortmund would be up there, but Bayern would certainly be up there as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, Dortmund's definitely on the bucket list, and for many of the reasons that you've explained there, I've been told stories from the World Cup back in '06, just how Germany is a fantastic country for hosting major tournaments and has a unique football culture, like the 50+1 rule, ticket prices, um, the ultras there, a proper footballing country. You touched on it a little bit, but as far as the games that you managed to cover, any standout moments that will live long in the memory?
For different reasons. I don't think the tournament as a whole had too many memorable moments compared to the history of major tournaments. Uh, what was quite bizarre about it, obviously, I didn't cover an England game, but England, without of capturing the imagination in a general point of view of the way they played football, did actually produce moments that I would say 3 or 4 moments that would be in the top 10 best England moments, 100%. It was very bizarre. It was very bizarre the way we come out of this because there was a slight negativity about it. But actually, when you break it down, the moments that England had, like Bellingham overhead kick, the Saka goal against Switzerland, the penalty shootout, the Ollie Watkins goal, even the Cole Palmer goal in the final, these are, for me, top 10 moments being an England fan watching them in a major tournament, without doubt. I mean, I've said it before, we've had documentaries made about Italia 90 and Euro 96, and this tournament just gone beat both of those in terms of how far England got and the moments in it, really. And actually, in terms of the way they played, nostalgia does amazing things. People think things were always better in the past. It's just the way the human mind works. Because we think in the present, there's problems in the present, and it was all rosy in the past. I could tell you, both Italia 90 and Euro 96, I wouldn't say they were sparkling. The football was sparkling. I can't, definitely not. So I'd say the most exciting tournament I ever remember watching was Euro 2008. England weren't even in it, but that had some great games in it.
Yeah.
Fantastic football in it. But as far as the games I covered, so obviously Spain, France had that importance to it being the semi-final. I thought any game I did with Spain, and I actually did a game against Georgia and their win over Croatia as well, and they were, from that moment, I just thought they were the best team by far in terms of aesthetically pleasing to watch and having the substance as well to go far. A lot of times teams in tournament play well, but they tend not to be the teams that won it. We actually had a team that was the best team to watch and won it, which is quite rare. It basically never happens. I can't really think of many occasions when it's happened. And when Spain have won it in the past, I found them quite dull, actually. but this was not a dull Spain side. I think they had enough vulnerability about them, but enough they can impose themselves enough. You know, you think in the knockout stages, the run they had, they played all the best. They played some top nations, even in their group. They had Croatia and Italy in their group, the host Germany in the quarterfinals, France the favourites in the semi-finals, and probably the second favourites, England, in the final. And they beat all of those teams.
And record.
And you have to, yeah, and you have to say that they deserve to beat all those teams in all those games. Actually, when you look at the games as a whole, and I think that's quite a good thing. And Spain's in a great place. But besides the Spain matches, Croatia Albania was good fun. That was definitely good fun. Just the way the game, you had Albania massive outsiders scoring early in that game, which they had done in their first match, and then Croatia turning around the second half. When they went 2-1 up, you thought, well, that's it, they've done it. And then Albania equalising really late on, and the guy who scores the equaliser is the guy who scored an own goal just moments earlier, and that for me is football. There, if you were an Albanian side in your moment, that was a moment for the ages. And it was also a moment that probably definitely cost Croatia a place in the knockout stages at the same time. So it had that impact. I enjoyed doing Austria. I thought they were good fun to watch. And they actually basically just met their match in Turkey, who were another team prepared to be bold. Weirdly, though, I think I did Turkey, Netherlands. I was really looking forward to that one. But I found it was almost like the second half, Turkey just completely ran out of gas. And the Netherlands just squeezed and just got the job done in the end. And the second half wasn't that memorable, which was just a bit of a disappointment because I thought this is going to be a classic. Because Turkey were again one of the sides prepared to just go for it, and they were great. But I said I think overall it wasn't a tournament with many moments when you come away from it and you look back at it and think what was the standout story of that tournament. And I'd probably say it's Yamal really. You know, to be that young and to have that impact at a major tournament is and then that I think his goal against France was the biggest I've ever gone on a goal in a major tournament that I've covered, because it was building to that. I just thought this is ridiculous. To score an amazing goal at 16 years of age against France for your country in the Euro semi-final, it's just nothing really tops that, really.
That was his first goal at the tournament as well. So for all of his assists and all of the flair and how well he played up to that point, he really needed that highlight reel moment.
Absolutely. And we all I think we have a tendency, of course, in football, in the way it's consumed. Obviously, social media plays its part in that people look at moments from players to define if they're any good or not. And actually, at the top level of football, it's really about consistency of performance and doing it all the time. Some players have obviously built careers off a few moments, but I think in the modern age as well, where people can see almost every game that a top player plays, whereas in the past that wasn't the case. So a player like Zidane, who performed in the big tournaments, in the big moments, but people weren't watching him week in, week out. So to give a proper picture and a proper comparison to players now that are scrutinised every performance, they are gone through with a fine-tooth comb, certainly by clubs that might be interested as well in buying them. I think your mouth really, for someone of that age, to just get it right at that time was just magical. It really was.
It was. And am I right in saying that was your sixth major tournament with ITV?
Men and women. Oh, actually, I'm trying to think now. Well, male-wise, so I was with Euro 2008, the World Cup in South Africa, Euros in 2012, but I wasn't out there. And then got jump forward to Euro 2020, and then the last World Cup as well as this Euros.
Yeah.
I wasn't counting as I was doing that. So I think that's about right.
Yeah.
If I've said it in a post, that's probably right. And also, yeah, because in 2014, I was there for HBS, and 2016, I didn't work on that Euros. Actually, I didn't work on the Euros at all. And then 2018 World Cup, I was there for HBS as well.
Yeah, the point being that, to reach, the number of tournaments that you have in your profession is a real accomplishment. And behind that, there's a massive amount of research and preparation and effort on your part. And to sort of talk more about the role of a commentator, they play such an integral role in the broadcast of any sport, for those moments that we were just talking about then. What drew you to pursue a career as a lead commentator?
Well, I'd say just to go back those, so not all those tournaments I was there as a commentator, actually. I was a producer before. That, I would say, has played a massive role in going into commentary because you understand how TV works and that as a commentator, you're the icing on the cake, really. But I mean that in terms of you have to be aware of what's in the cake and what's going on beneath you because you are just the sort of the gloss on top just to add a bit of, I'd say all sorts of things. It can add, being a commentator can add nostalgia, can add excitement to a game, context to a game for some people. But I knew I always wanted to be a commentator for the moment you're in the mindset of thinking of what you're going to do when you're older. And I keep saying that is where the luck comes in having that mindset when you're young to go, that's what I want to do. And then what usually happens for most people as time goes on, they get knocked out of that through all sorts of reasons. It can be family reasons, it can be circumstance, but it can also just be people around you putting you off or saying that's not something you can do. It can be just after a while you thinking, I can't be bothered to. It can be something as simple as that. Um, it can be just a feeling of also thinking, oh, maybe I'm not good enough to do it. There are, I'd say I think there's literally hundreds of reasons to stop people from doing something. But I think I always, because it was such a niche thing to go into, and also saw it as something that you could work towards, while it might require a little bit of talent, but it's also something you can just work towards. That's how I saw it. So if I thought when I grow up I want to be a footballer, now there's a realism to that as time goes on. And there's a point where you go, well, this is not going to happen. I'm not going to be a professional footballer of any standard. But there are so many jobs out there that if somebody just thinks I want to do this as a young person, then it's very achievable. If you're obviously being in this country, it's very achievable. Um, and a lot of times people will think of reasons of not to do something, but I never thought about that way. I had that luck of thinking, oh, actually, do you know what? They, I think I really want to do this, really want to get there, and I didn't really care about other people saying whether it was possible or not, or reasons why I couldn't do it, because I just saw my mindset was there are people doing it, so why can't I do it? That's all. That's all I thought. And people around me would say you can't do it because of this, you can't do it that. But every reason people would give, I'd say I don't know, I don't see that. I really don't see that.
Okay.
I'd say, and I'd say the one thing that I knew I had to be aware of was at the end of the day, as an adult, you have to earn money, and that was always the thing. So I thought that's why I went into production first. So I thought any way of getting into telly, you get into telly, and I'm earning money. And actually, if it wasn't for that factor, I probably would have committed to commentary earlier. But at certain points, I was dueling. I was doing a bit of commentary and a bit of production, a bit of all sorts of different jobs in telly, actually. And I think about this and I think I've done pretty much most every job in telly going, as
Nice.
it goes. Except maybe I was going to say I haven't been a camera operator, but I did do some filming around the World Cup in 2014, funnily enough. But I've given every job a go and been paid for pretty much every job. Maybe you haven't been paid for editing, but I've edited. Oh, actually, no, that's not true. No, I have been. Have been. So yeah, I've tried every job go, and that's why whenever I speak to somebody, if people talk about jobs in telly, I feel like I've got advice for them. You can give people insight because actually, a lot of time it is about personal attitude and being prepared to put yourself in situations where you're not maybe comfortable, or putting yourself around people maybe you think, oh, I wouldn't be around these people normally, or and that's often the reason why people stop doing anything. It's that comfort, that feeling of, oh, I don't really like this environment, and that's what is the biggest barrier, I think, a lot of the time, because people want to feel comfortable. It's very natural to feel comfortable, but at the same time, there's that comfort, but there's also that personal drive. And whether you're somebody who thinks, I want to do this, I want to achieve this, I want to do that, that's part of, that's the counterbalance, I would say. You have your own personality and you have the things that you like and don't like. But I think a big part of being successful is sort of looking at other people and thinking, can you tolerate what they're like as an individual? Can you tolerate it or not? If you're somebody who, I don't know, who doesn't like people who I don't know, drum their fingers on the table, like a little thing like that, you've got to say to yourself, is this really something as a big enough problem that's really going to stop me doing what I'm doing? You know, is this something I can overcome, my own principles or whatever it might be? I'm trying to give examples. I'm trying to think of people when they tend to give up. And a lot of the time, if people, but I've seen people either drop out from something, I think it's a feeling of either something they feel, it's either two reasons. Either they don't actually know what they want to do, so they don't know what to do. And the other reason is they just hits a point where they think, I can't financially make this work. I can't commit to doing this over and over again without getting paid for it. And that's what causes them to go, I'm going to have to change direction. Now, I think something like, it depends on the role, I think, in television, on how long you go down a road where you think, can I do this or not? Because I think there is certainly a point when you think, I can't, this is not really happening. And actually, you're probably doing yourself more harm by continuing. There is a certain point to that. Also, depends on your situation, your family situation, what's required from you as an individual in that moment in your life. That might sound strange, but if you have a family and they're just looking at you trying to chase your dream, you have to share that now with other people, and that's just fact of life.
Yeah.
But while you're young and you don't necessarily have that responsibility, that's the time to go, I'm going to go for it. But I do think there's an element of checking your pride, checking what you think you deserve type attitude, which I see a lot from people.
Yeah.
People looking down on certain jobs, people looking down on certain people feeling that they are better than others, massive hindrances to them, unless they are just blindly with that and they just keep powering on. And that's quite a powerful force as well. Not a likable one, but it is quite effective sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's no, because when people talk about advice to being successful, there's no magic pill to that. But I do think it is about the individual thinking to themselves, checking their pride. What do I need from my life? What do I actually want to achieve? What is my end goal? What would I like to be doing? And in terms of getting there, what has to happen? So I'll give you an example. If you just say, I want to be Mark Pugach, right? I want to present TV programs.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, somebody's doing that job. If you say, I want to be ITV's lead presenter, right? Yeah, that's my job I want to do. But somebody's already doing that job at this moment in time. So you think to us, well, they're doing this job at the moment in time. But I want to be best placed when something happens to say, I'm next in line, or people can see what I'm doing here and I might be plucked elsewhere. And to do that, you just have to be doing it. I know it sounds mad. And you could be doing the same thing for 10 years, and then all of a sudden, in that first day into the 11th year, something happens for you. Or 2 years, something happens for you. It's about the persistence, but the learning on the way. If somebody says to you, oh, I don't like that you've done that, and think about it, well, is this something I can change? Can I change this or not? If I can't change it, I'll just keep plowing on because maybe somebody will like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's I just always think that there's whatever stage you do, people always want more, and they're rarely happy. So there's never a moment where you go, ah, I'm there, I've made it. I don't think that ever happens in anybody's life, and that's quite a good thing, actually. I think that's always quite a individual thinking, oh, you know, I can always keeps life interesting.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that response very much, mate. It was very meaningful. And to contextualize it almost in terms of a little bit of what I said earlier in terms sort of how you outgrow that feeling of discomfort, but also going off what you said there, being best placed to advance and progress in your vision. Um, Maybe I've got it wrong here, but as far as commentary, I would sort of see it as two things: there's a theoretical aspect to it, and there's a practical aspect to it. In terms of the theory, I have no doubt that someone such as you would absolutely smash that out of the park in terms of the knowledge and the work that goes in behind the scenes, your research process and whatnot, especially given your previous roles in production. I know firsthand that the work that goes in there. So work rate wouldn't be an issue. In terms of that, the practical side, um, in terms of being sat in a booth or in a gantry with a live microphone, with a co-commentator, um, where did those first few early experiences come to you? Because I always feel like they're interesting to hear.
Yeah, and when I get asked this, I always say that I tend to treat. I'm one of those people. I'm always looking ahead. I'm always looking ahead. So when I'm in the moment of something, I do find it quite difficult to capitalize on it from a memory point of view. So people always say to me, "Oh, Seb, do you remember when we did?" And I go, "Oh, no, not really." I was going, "Oh no, no, I don't remember that." I'm really bad at taking photos of getting proper memories of memorabilia. You know, I could talk about great moments. People said, "Do you have a photo of it?" And I'm like, no, not really, because it's not my first thought. I'm always thinking ahead. So I'm thinking when the game ends, I'm thinking, right, how do I get out of the ground and get back to where I need to get to? I'm thinking logistics all the time, or I'm just thinking about the football itself, and fun enough, probably thinking of the next game, which is, I don't know, I have a comfort doing that. That's not to say I don't enjoy the moment. So when I get asked about, do I remember my first memory of such and such? Don't really. I can't. I'm not very good at that. And the reason why people find that quite hard to understand is because when I came into TV, I had a weird route into telly in that when I was a teenager, I started running at the BBC, and I was able to get some knowledge of telly. As you know, when you're running and stuff, you see a lot of how things are working and the people involved in that process without necessarily knowing what goes into it for their individual jobs, but you can see the number of people involved in the process. And then and then I went to university, and then I did a master's after that, and then after that I did, while I was doing the masters, I did a bit more work experience and some paid short term running and producing junior producing jobs. And then when I joined ITV, I joined it as a junior producer. And then over time, when I left about 13 years ago to go freelance, I then was doing different roles then as well as doing commentary. So it all rolled into one really. And I think because I always believed I was going to get the opportunity. So the best way of looking at it is I was at as far as commentating at a game, I was at the games and I was in those areas. So then just picking up the mic from being next to the mic just felt natural to me because I already was something I already wanted to do. I think a lot of people, when they do these jobs, they go into the industry, that's what I want to do. And that's what they end up doing when they're in there. So you have people who are reporting and they've not done any other jobs in telly. So they will, of course, remember their first reporting experience.
Mhm.
But I can't. I can remember my first. because I think this will be my fourth season with Sky. So I remember my first game with Sky because it wasn't that long ago, so I can remember that. And that was Monday Night Football, West Ham United against Leicester, 4-1 win for West Ham, and it was great fun, just great fun. Mm. Every game feels I just get into every game. I just weirdly, like, as I said, somebody who looks forward. Once the game kicks off and I'm into the throw of the game, I'm loving every second of it. There's not a hint of apprehension or nerves or something's going to go wrong. Blah blah blah. I revel in that moment, and I think that's quite important. I'm not really thinking what people are thinking about. I'm just quite comfortable in that environment at that time. My discomfort comes from logistical. I might have got somewhere to park. How I'm going to be able to get to the position from this sort of way. That's when I get, if there's any sort of stress or nerves coming into it, that's when it comes into it. Thinking, oh, can I? Oh, that route's blocked off. Can I get there? Just mad things. If before the game there's a bit of information I need to get hold of and I cannot get hold of it, that's when I'm a bit agitated. I need to know this information. Usually it's to do with pronouncing a player's name, and I need a trusted source. But actually, as time's gone on, I've felt easier about that. Yeah, the pronunciations is a whole nother thing because it's such an interesting area of football commentary. It's not really about getting a name right. It's getting a name right in a way that everybody is expecting.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you think you are nailing a pronunciation, if it's not the common way people are used to it, people aren't going to like it.
Yeah.
It's just like language in general. Also, if you're saying a name that isn't, in inverted commas, an English name, you're never going to nail the pronunciation of that, because to the English ear it will sound foreign, and to the name, where the name comes from, that native language, you're never nailing it anyway because it's not your native language. So you find yourself in this weird scenario. So I always think the more sensible thing is to anglicize the names. If there's any sort of sense that you're going to stumble on it, or any sort of sense that you're going to struggle, you have to make it comfortable for you to say, because it's not the only word you're saying in the match.
Yeah.
You don't want to hit a point where I think the great one, we had it in the Euros, and we had so Georgia did Spain Georgia. You can imagine the Georgian names before the game, and people before the game, everyone was saying, "Oh God, you have so many problems with the Georgian names." And I sort of said, "Well, the way I looked at it two ways. One is 99% of the audience don't know these players. They don't know these players. Secondly, even if they did, they don't know Georgian. They don't know the correct way to say these players. You are, in a sense, imposing on them how to say these players' names. So if you are stumbling over a player's name because you're trying to be as authentic as possible, it's going to be a mess." So we had so Kvaratskhelia, the big player for Georgia, to try and be as authentic as possible. It's not really a Skelia sound; it's like a Helia sound. But you can imagine that somebody speaking English like going very wrong,
Yeah.
because it's not a sound you make in English. So you're forcing something that doesn't come naturally in the sentence. Some people are good at doing that and they can just flow into that, but it usually comes from some experience. So, an example, like, for example, Derek Ray has worked a lot in Germany. He's been there for a long time, so he's with German names. He's comfortable saying them authentically. Ian, for example, was part of the ITV team. She's Dutch. She knows how to say a Dutch name comfortably. But if you're not in that environment, you shouldn't. Trying to force it, it just sounds odd. I think it just doesn't quite work. And you're in a more comfortable zone, just speaking smoothly, I think, more than anything.
No, that makes sense
Sorry
entirely.
to go off topic. That's you weren't asking about
Oh,
pronunciations,
not at all.
but I thought I better answer it because
No, not at all. That's the purpose of these podcasts, mate. I love it when people go off on tangents. I learn an awful lot from it. Um, as far as commentators, like I know you said there, as soon as there was a realization of what do I want to be when I'm older, You always had that idea of I want to be a commentator. Um, there are so many league commentators who whose their contribution to the sport have earned them an iconic status within the industry. From my childhood, the likes of Clive Tiltley, who I've been lucky enough to speak to, Martin Tyler, but even going back, in my role as a researcher, and in the hours I put in on the archive, the likes of Brian Moore, Gerald Sinstadt, and there are so many commentators to draw from, and each are uniquely their own in their approach and in their delivery and in their use of voice. Um, how you use your voice to amplify important moments or significant actions within a match reminds me strikingly of John Motson. I don't know if anyone's ever sort of told you that before, but
No, no,
it reminds me a lot of John Motson. Were there anyone for you growing up that you drew a lot of inspiration from?
well, definitely Brian Moore. Absolutely 100%. He would be my number one for that. Um, David Coleman, weirdly, in athletics, even though he was a football commentator before, but the age I'm at, I knew him more for athletics. And I think those two in particular, because I always remember just thinking to myself, the number one most important thing is your voice and how you're using it, not actually what you're saying. Obviously, there's to an extent, if you're getting players' names wrong, it's a different factor. But what I mean is, if I'm a big believer, and it's probably, and actually, most of the top commentators in history have had this skill. And you mentioned John Motson, he had this as well. When you are calling a moment, what emotion are you putting to that moment? Because the emotion you put to that moment is conveying to the audience its importance, really. And I always think to myself, I like to be excitable when chances happen because I think that's the nature of football. It's an excitable sport, mainly because it's not a sport where there's action constantly happening. It's quite a low scoring sport. So if I was to put my style on, say, basketball, it would be a bit more controlled for every time they score a point because there's so many points. And even in rugby, actually, I'd be a bit more tempered, unless it's the winning try in the dying minutes or something. But football, because goals are relatively rare in that 90 minutes, it feels like every time there is a goal or that there's going to be a goal, to me, it's the big moment in the game. And it's the most important thing. What I loved about Brian Moore was he didn't say much in his commentary, but there was a gravitas to it as he was saying it. It was like, and he had there was an emotion to it as well. And being an older man at that point when he did it, and that's what's great about commentary is it's something that as you get older you get better at. I mean that you could apply that to most things, but it actually just makes you more excited. So you're not worried about the future. There's no race. There's no race in time. If you're somebody who wants to be a commentator and you're in your 20s and you think, I need to be doing this by now, not really. This is something, Martin Tyler's late 70s and he's still doing it. It's not something that there's a ticking clock on.
Mhm.
There is always a moment. And you could start in your 20s and done by your 40s and then not be working in it for 20 years. You don't know what's going to happen. You never put, unless you're in an athlete where it is important, your age is very important because that's your body. In anything where your body is not relevant, and I'm not counting voice when I say that, there's no race. There's no clock on that or anything like that. But yeah, certainly growing up, it's funny because I was an ITV man growing up, and I don't know why. I don't know what the difference was, why I was more team ITV than BBC, and I still don't really. I think it's because of the Champions League nights, and because they had the adverts around the games, it weirdly added a gravitas to it. It was
Yeah.
sort of felt more of an event.
Mhm.
Because, oh, we back after the break, and this program's sponsored by Continental Tires or whatever it might be. It just, I don't know, there was something that added to it. It felt like you were then taken away from the game momentarily for something else. And Champions League nights felt big because at that time, the live BBC games would be more FA Cup games, maybe internationals, but those big Champions League nights felt massive. It's been lost a bit with the Champions League in its current situation because it's not really free to air as it stands. So that I think that has affected the competition a bit in terms of its luster because it was those games felt huge in the time when they were on ITV live on those midweeks. It just felt.
Like you were saying before, though, you used the example of Zinedine Zidane. And,
Mm.
not everybody would have had the access to see that sort of talent. So for it to be on free to air was huge.
100%. Same with international tournaments, and that's why they were great and they added to it. And I used to, yeah, those games, and like you, as you've said about commentators, I think that's you feel a responsibility when you do those big games because you feel you are intertwined with that memory. You have no control over what's happening on the pitch, but you are part of that moment when it happens. And I always think of Michael Owen's goal in the '98 World Cup. And I just think in terms of games having a deep emotional feel about a game, I think that England Argentina game in '98 felt really significant in so many ways. Yeah, interesting because I always felt that I won't talk about the football because that's going off topic, but in terms of content point of view, that was Brian Moore's last tournament, and that was his last England game. And at the end of the game, he asks Kevin Keegan, "Do you think, about David Batty's penalty? Will he score?" And Keegan said yes, and then he failed from the spot, and it became like a moment. But I always thought to myself, but that sums it up. That's him being connected with the game he's watching emotionally. He's an Englishman desperate for England to win, but he's a professional that understands the importance of the moment. And if you watch back at that game, and even any goals really, England goals from that tournament, it's that connection. When Michael Owen scored his goal, he got the importance of it straight away. It's not just another goal. You have to give it something. So I go back to the Yamal goal. To me, this is an iconic moment. So you take it out of that game and you play it back in 20 years' time, it doesn't lose any of its importance.
Oh.
Spain are losing the game, the 16-year-old to France, one of the best teams in the semi-final, and your 16-year-old winger curls one into the top corner from outside the box to become the youngest ever goal scorer in the Euros history. And he would have been the youngest if it had been in the World Cup. He would have still been the youngest. He's that young. So it felt iconic to go big on it. But equally, when Albania equalised in the last minute, it felt a big moment. It is a big moment still. Mm-hmm. And that's what I tried to achieve. I just want to, the people watching this game, is this goal important to them? Now, someone might come from the outside who's not interested in that particular match and go, who cares about that? But that's not who you're commentating for. It's totally irrelevant. I think it's, from an Everton point of view, I remember they played Crystal Palace a couple of seasons ago. It was a midweek game, and they were 2-0 down at Goodison. And their last game of the season was away at Arsenal.
Yep.
And the feeling was basically they're 2-0 down at Goodison. You feel the atmosphere of the ground and thinking, going down, going down. And then the game just turned around in the second half. It was extraordinary. There's a pitch invasion at the end, because everyone just got it straight away. And from being down and out to safe within 40 minutes just encapsulates importance. And then Calvert-Lewin scoring his goal, just that you have to go crazy. You're doing the moment a disservice if you don't give it everything. Now, people will talk about an element of control, and I think commentary is a very subjective thing because there's people who like a more measured, controlled approach. I just think it's, from my point of view, I'm just thinking, well, it just becomes forgettable then if you do that.
In the moment, a disservice.
Yeah, if Yamal put it top corner, I go, oh, what a brilliant goal from Yamal. It's like, yes, that sounds controlled and authoritative. But come on. Come on. I could do it if it's a normal goal on a Premier League weekend to make it 1-0. I can go through that. But if the moment's big enough, And that applies. I'm thinking even the Premier League can be a moment. Forest had a goal a couple of seasons ago, and Danilo scored against Southampton, and it effectively was a win that did really keep them up. You go big on that, and I still have Forest fans to this game who to this day keep quoting me about the commentary for that goal.
Yeah.
And I think these things happen. When Reece Nelson scored for Arsenal, they're 2-0 down against Bournemouth, they're in the title race. He scores a 97th minute winner. Massive, absolutely massive. Someone can go, Arsenal should beat Bournemouth. But in the context of that game, they weren't beating Bournemouth, and they were about to drop 2 points against the rampant Manchester City side. You have no room for manoeuvre in that moment. Now, you temper it. I was thinking last season I did Man City were at Brentford, and they were 1-0 down. Brentford scored. Mope scored. And I didn't go massive on the goal because the time. I went big on it, but not crazy because of the timing of the goal. I've watched Man City enough to know he could be 1-0 up against them in the first half. This doesn't mean anything. This only means something maybe late in the game. If you'd scored that goal in the 95th minute, you go big then. So it's all about every goal to me is about context. How good the goal is and what is the importance of the goal. Those are the two things that will make me go crazy on a goal. And if I'm going crazy on a goal, it's because one of those two boxes have been ticked, basically.
So that they're key, they're huge, but another large part to a league commentator striking a chord with an audience is how well they combine with their co-commentator. I'm sure there's like a a partnership metaphor in there somewhere in terms of playing to each other's strengths and
Mm.
things like that. But your co-commentator, their media experience can be anywhere from inexperienced to, a seasoned veteran. Um, how do you find adapting to different commentators? Because different former pros may analyze the game differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to remember, it's also a communications job as well.
Mhm.
So somebody could be the greatest player on the planet, but if they can't communicate that to somebody else, you don't get a sense of that. Somebody could have been an average player, relatively, but if they're a fantastic communicator, then all of a sudden they've made up that ground on a more established player. But I always think to myself, my co-commentator, every time, whoever it may be, I know they've had experiences that get in the game that I haven't had. Doesn't matter who they are, they've had experiences in the game. So I will want to draw on that. But I also want to try and align with their personality. And I try to, sometimes it might change your comms a bit. But I don't want to go down a line if I'm in a more jokey mood with somebody. But, if I'm somebody who likes to be joking around with a co-com, but I don't think they're that sort of person, I'm not going to force it. I'll try a little bit, but if they don't want to go down that road, then I won't do it. I'll keep it straight. You have to be. You don't want there to be a friction. It comes across as a friction. Human nature is certain people. It's just going to work, and it's just going to blend nicely, and you don't even have to think about it. But even then, even in those scenarios, you still have to remember what your job is
Yeah,
because you don't want to be going down the road of I'm just chatting with a mate.
yeah, yeah,
You're
yeah.
still having to cover the game. So it goes down the same road of when people say, is it harder to cover Croatia, Albania than Spain, France? I'd say that they are pretty much equal, really, because it's about expectation. So, yes, Croatia, Albania, I'd have to do more research about the players, but that research I do is new to most people watching. It's a bonus. People turn up, they know not a lot. If you do Spain France, the audience is going to know a lot about the players. So then all of a sudden you have to be on top of that. So it balances itself out. It's absolute. If I take two unknown sides, I could just be telling you anything and you go along with it because you don't know these teams. But if I tried that with Manchester City, Man United, I'd have no chance. So it balances itself out. I don't think there's, and as far as co-coms are concerned, it's exactly the same thing in that you, when someone new for the first time, you are establishing a relationship, but that there's interest in doing that. You know, you're learning, you're getting to hear new stuff. You're not stuck in a rut. You're maybe learning something. And I watch football, I would say, with an analytical eye, but I try not to talk too much like that during the game. It can be quite alienating. And also, who am I to tell people that necessarily? You know,
Yeah,
try and do that and try and leave that to the co-commentator as much as possible. But actually, my commentary approach is less about stats and irrelevant stories and more about this footballer.
yeah.
Who are they? What are their strengths and weaknesses? It's my absolute starting point with any player. And then once I'm into that, I'm into the game. And that's the element of the research I actually really enjoy. You know, if there's an unknown player, who are they? What position do they play? You know, are they, you know, why are they important to this team? Why does the manager pick them every week? That's what I want to know. And I love getting under the surface of that.
Something else that has sprung to mind that I'm sure from how you're speaking to me, I'm thoroughly enjoying it in that you're very analytical to the core in how you approach your craft, and obviously with the television production experience behind that, it just made me think with the advent of social media and how fans consume football, is that an added pressure in how you adapt your style of commentary, knowing that people consume football through clips?
Yeah, that's that's a very good question. I don't think social media's done that. Weirdly, being a producer's done that because I'm always quite aware of the fact that there's going to be highlights made. So what I'm doing is I try and be quite sharp to the pictures if I can. So if there's a replay and the replay's coming to an end, I'll try not to talk over it because I know where it's going to be cut, which is quite a weird way of saying it. I would say during the game generally, it's weird because 99% of your job isn't the big moments, it's everything else. And a lot of the time, when, say, somebody spoke to me and they said, "I want to be a commentator and everything else," and I say, record yourself doing a whole game and do start 5 minutes before kickoff and do it for a couple of minutes at full time and at least a minute at half time and then 30 seconds coming back from break and record yourself doing the entire match because anybody, and I'm not thinking anybody, can commentate on a goal and somebody will like it, unless of course you're really down. Oh, what a goal! That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I've heard people who've sent stuff like that, and you're like, "Are you joking?" Um, that to me is one of those where nobody likes that, but there are styles that people like in terms of how they want to do things. So there's always that. But in terms of the actual commentating, covering a whole match, that's often a thing that puts people off the most because it is an effort. You know, it's a lot of work, and a lot of the time, the goal is the moment that is remembered, but it's such a minor part of your prep. But you can't prepare for a goal. So if you want to have a fancy line that you think you're going to say on a goal, it can really come out quite forced and
Yeah,
quite contrite. And like I tend to, I'll almost say to myself, what are the key points of this game? So I knew that if Yamal scored, he's going to be the youngest scorer. So I have that in my notes next to his name. I know, bang. So when he scores, I have to mention that, whatever. That's what I have written down. But the idea that I'm then going to write some prose that's all going to run together nicely, it just, some people can write stuff down beforehand and it comes out and they can do it like that. But I think you have to be very comfortable doing that. And you have to be very comfortable in your own skin doing that. It just feels like, you know, that's why acting is a talent because it is an act at that point if you're able to do that. Otherwise, I think it's definitely something to avoid. I think it's just you just go with your gut when the moment happens, and just carry that, because that's what the emotion of you calling the goal will be what's remembered. If you think about it, like a good example is with Martin Tyler with the Aguero moment. The thing that people remember is just him saying the player's name. That's what gets remembered. Not really what he says after that. It's just the Aguero. That's it. But it's the way he says it. That's what matters. It's not, if he'd come out and the goal had gone in and go, Aguero, the hero, or whatever it might be, that's all well and good. But all people genuinely care about is the emotion of how somebody said that moment and how it stuck with them.
I would dispute that. I would dispute that. I felt in that moment, because I can remember it quite clearly, that what Tyler said, like what you touched on earlier, it lined up so perfectly with every single cut. So it was like, watch it, drink
Oh yeah, drink it. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
where
But I'm
you'll
talking
never
about the
see.
general. I'm talking
Yeah,
about general people. What the first thing they go to isn't the drink it
yeah,
in.
yeah.
The first thing they go to is the Aguero. That's what they. I was even had the other day with Bill Leslie, was talking to him because the Troy Deeney goal is a big thing for him in the playoff semi-final, and even then, just getting the name right in the moment, just call the winning goal scorer and nail that, because it, the talent comes into it with what the words that Martin said then. But if you're thinking, I've got to chase that magic line, you're going to miss so much stuff. You miss so much. Imagine you chasing that line, you're trying to contrive and try and get that in. All of a sudden, it's something else has happened. Just say the goal's gone in, and while you're chasing that line, they do this amazing celebration, and they all just jump on them, they disappear. Just call that, just capture that. If you do want to get a line in, just wait a bit, just wait a bit, calm down, then drop it in.
Yeah.
Then you got time maybe if you want to read it off a sheet or whatever. But I just think the excitement of the moment is the key, because if you don't capture the excitement, then you're in trouble. If you capture the excitement and deliver a killer line, then you're in business. But imagine if mine had said those exact words, drink it in. Imagine if he'd said that, but he'd taken half the emotion off saying it.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't hit the same way at all.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't hit the same way. I'm saying this more of people thinking if that's the way to go, you've got to be damn comfortable doing it. You really do. Yeah, so I think people could see through that. I think that the people always authenticity is one of the key things. Is this person being authentic? Do they actually what they're saying? Do they actually believe it? Which is hard because you're a professional, so you're trying to hit your cues and blah blah blah. But yeah, I'm always of that thought. I mean, as far as social media is concerned, I think it goes back to what I was saying before about my mindset of not being able to revel in the moment at the time.
Yeah.
I feel like as far as social media is concerned, I'm not really plowed into it enough in terms of my own profile on it, promoting what I'm doing, pushing out, I'm here at this place, this is blah, 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 blah. I've been absolutely rubbish at that. Absolutely rubbish at that. Mainly because I just don't really, it feels like a distraction on the day. I don't really care.
Yeah.
And also I think it's because I'm in the generation of remembering before social media, sort of growing up into adult through it, and getting that general picture is I understand it, but I don't care. it's quite
Um,
it's
I,
quite hard. It's not I don't care, which is quite I find it quite frustrating because I actually feel like I wish I did care a little bit, because it's got power to it, that's for sure.
it's liberating,
Um,
I think. It's
it's
liberating
liberating.
that you
Yeah,
think that
no, I think that.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think people. I think it's funny social media because I think it's given people a voice who wouldn't have had a voice, 100%, and that's probably the main positive of it. But it's also dragging people's general mental health down a
Yeah.
hole, an
Yeah.
absolute hole. It's the issues, what I say, of, the seven deadly sins. Think about the seven deadly sins. They're all on display in social media every day. With every post somebody puts up, it's one of those sins is being violated, because it's just the nature of it. If there's a pride, take back the pride, envy, lust,
Gluttony.
wrath, and even and just being on it is a sloth type of sloth, really, because you could be doing something else. And I think the biggest danger of it, some people have managed to really capture social media and get it to the point where they become influencers. And
Yeah.
being an influencer carries a great responsibility, which I actually think should be, in the law, should be monitored a bit closer than it is, because those people have a lot of power, I'd say, especially with younger people and very old people. They carry a lot of influence in that sort of stuff. People just go down these rabbit holes that just can warp their mind.
Yeah.
Weirdly, with football is quite clear in that I find it a bit funnier with football, because football's a tribal thing anyway. So the way people talk on social media is actually the way they talk about football one on one half the time,
Yeah.
having a dig at the rival club, doing jokes about players, whatever it might be. Football's probably the closest. Football online is the closest to football in reality, I'd say, of anything else. It's just, there's so many other spheres of human life which are just nonsense on social media and not in reality. But I'd say football is absolutely quite close to that. But again, it goes back to the not caring. If somebody says something, I tend to have a thing where, like, if somebody says something negative, I think people naturally, they could hear 10 nice things and one negative thing can knock them off their feet.
Yeah.
But if you're aware of that, it's actually can give you great peace, because you realize that people are more likely to complain than they are to praise. If you have a bad experience at a restaurant, or you have a brilliant experience at a restaurant, you're more likely to go out of your way to complain if something goes wrong than to go out of your way to say, that was wonderful. We just don't really do it. Football, though, is, again, same thing. If somebody does something good in football, people are straight on to say, that's amazing, blah, blah, blah. That's all sport in general. And that's what, again, where sport has that power in social media. But I do worry, like, a lot of younger players care too much about that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know why, because you can be the best player in the world. Rival fans are going to attack you. That's just the way it is. Your own fans are going to attack you if you don't perform. It doesn't have. Just back yourself. If you reach that level, you are of a minority of people who've managed to reach that level of that ability. But I think people do get knocked off their feet by the negativity of it. I don't think it's affected. It's only affected my comms in terms of me just thinking, just be more succinct and be tidier with your commentary.
Okay.
That's it.
To wrap up now, I wanted to just going off what you said before in terms of tendency for nostalgia, thinking things were better in the past, and not long finished the book by Jonathan Wilson, Inventing the Pyramid.
I read
Um,
that book. Yeah.
yeah, which we going back, people think that football's changed with Pep Guardiola, but you can trace it a lot further back than Pep Guardiola. You go back to Cruyff, Rinus Michels, the sort of English contingent that runs through Barcelona history and
Yeah.
Dutch
Big
football history.
Buckingham. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, what are your thoughts on the sort of situation that we now find ourselves in? Is it better now?
Better. Oh gosh. I'd say the big difference now, that I would say that football was better back in the day, was players were closer to fans. That's the biggest thing I'd say off the top of my head, in the fact that fans felt more connected to the players than they do now. There's a distance between players and supporters, to an extent that it's understandable because of just the nature of things. But you feel like, after a game, the feeling of, you could just go and chat to a player and there wouldn't be somebody like in their way going, "Oh, you can't do this and blah blah, can't do that." And even we work in the media, and there's people blocking access to players and managing all of that sort of stuff. And before that wasn't the case. It was far easier to get interviews with players and managers. Um, and the media training, of course, most interviews are pretty dull now because people are scared of saying something that's going to get them into trouble. So that's again understandable. So that's a big element of it. To go back to what you were saying, I mean, my dad was a football coach, and you know, when I was really young, I wasn't really into football, but as I got older, I got more into it. And when I was speaking to him about football, and he would talk about, I think the biggest problem that English football had until very recently was a real insular look, real insular feel about it. And that happens when you're in Ireland, let's be frank, but an island that's done historically pretty well. You have this feeling of, and that's why a lot of people often say winning the '66 World Cup was one of the worst things to happen to English football, because having been a bit indifferent to the first few editions of the World Cup, then to get into it, they had a reality check with defeats against Hungary, a defeat against the US in the World Cup in 1950, and watching Brazil do what they do. But '66, being in England, I think it reasserted the FA and the way they thought about it, thinking, well, actually, there's nothing wrong with what we're doing, and we're the world leaders and stuff. And a lot of English coaches had big influences in clubs abroad as well, and the history was far closer connected to what we realise now. Like, people think of, we always say Athletic Club, or most people in England call them Athletic Bilbao, but it should be Athletic Club. And I heard some the other day on a social media thing calling them Atletico, and I was like, no, they're called Athletic, as in the English word athletic, because that's their foundation. It's actually Athletic Club, as in the English way of saying it. So it's quite an interesting way of looking at it. Whereas Atletico in Madrid is the Spanish word for the same thing. But having that influence of English football, and actually, principally, I know in Jonathan Wilson's book, he talks more of a Scottish influence, really. However you want to put it, I think British football has been held back in the same way that European football, particularly Central European football, Western Central European football, has blossomed because of that connection, that knowledge passover. Spain learning from the Netherlands, Germany and Italy and France all learning from each other. And that's why all those countries are pretty good at football and have such a good unit. What English football got right over time was the organisation and the running of the game, and they still have huge influence of that with the rules, with officiating, such a huge British element in IFAB, and in the success of the Premier League as well. In that, really, they've shown they know how to run the game, but in terms of on the pitch, been left behind by this thing over decades of this is how we should play football. And that's from grassroots to the top level. And I would say it's very, very recently that that's had any change. You think about if you play, even your age, you play football as a kid, what's expected of you when you play football is completely different than if you go to Spain and the way they look at the game. People are expecting you in England to run hard, to always be running, always be chasing, giving 100% at all times. You see, covering every ground, don't look like you're switching off, always being focused. And when you have the ball, don't take risks with the ball. Make sure that you play the safest pass possible, or the pass that's the most effective. They used to have this position of maximum opportunity, which was the baseline for English coaching for so long. And it ran right down. When you're in a wide area, play a diagonal to the back post. Dad always spoke about, he was in a training session in Lilleshall, the sort of FA headquarters for coaching, and he said he was in the wide zone, and he played a low ball across the sort of low ball that you see Man City win a league on, the cut-back ball. He'd seen Brazil do it in the 1970 World Cup, seeing this sort of pass, and the guy running, I think it was Charles Hughes, who's actually running that session. He said to him, like, "What are you doing? Stop the session. This is not how we do it. Don't do that Brazilian stuff here." Blah blah blah. And you think to yourself, but why are you so set in this whole idea of it being you're miles behind, and but they felt that they were ahead because they felt it's like it's almost like a English exceptionism. You feel like we work harder, we run stronger, we are faster, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, not really. Like, there are other human beings that could do this. And over time, their structure will. That's why England had embarrassing results against Sweden and Norway and Scandinavian countries who were very closely aligned with British football in the way they played. And they could beat England every now and again. Absolutely. I would say that's what I like about modern football is there's a different approach. But again, we can be caught up in this idea of we have to play a Guardiola way or whatever it might be. Football is fluid. There's no right way to play it. What it comes down to is the players at your disposal. Can you achieve something with the players at your disposal? Look at Spain from the international level. They had that golden period of what was high possession football, lose the ball, win it back quickly, but then just keep it in rotation, space, rotation. And they were able to have great success with that because of the generation of players who were able to execute that. If you don't have that quality of player to do that style of football, you're in trouble. Spain trying to play that football in this Euros, they would not have won this Euros. They had an added dynamic to it. England probably had better players, maybe, but they didn't have the structure to make those players work effectively. So much can go into it, but an individual player does not win you a tournament. Your team wins you a tournament. But if that individual player is in a system that helps them be maximized, of course they can be the difference in certain moments. But people forget it's a team sport a lot of the time, and they also forget that it's a sport where, like, I decided to go off topic. I think nowadays, like, everyone gets caught up in transfer fees about how much players cost. And you see people online saying, "Oh, Chelsea have spent this and Arsenal spent this and this player's worth this and we've only spent this," and everyone's an accountant online. But the key is nothing to do with transfer fees, how football works. It's to do with players' wages. The teams that can play the highest wages have the best players. And if they get it right with a good manager at the time, they will be the side teams that win the trophies. So when it comes to hurting clubs, when clubs hurt, they don't hurt from paying the big transfer fees. They hurt from paying players high wages, certain players high wages that they then. So if somebody says, "Why isn't my club buying a player?" It's because they can't afford to buy another player because they've already got a player in that position who's on a high wage. They might be not fancied by the manager. They might be on loan, but they're still on the books as a thing. I'm not a massive fan of the finance of football being such a powerful influence now and people caring about this stuff. Why do people care about the owners and players' wages and stuff? Like, growing up, no, I didn't care about any of that stuff. Wouldn't have had a clue how much players were on then because they certainly weren't on the money they were on now. But you just didn't. Why does that any of that matter, like, in terms of your enjoyment of the game? Because you have no control over that. But we're so beholden to it. So many fans care about that, and they
Well,
have no control.
trying to find a reason why, maybe, especially an English point of view, if you look at the rapid commercial development of the Premier League through broadcaster monies that have been pumped out, which, you know, are a large reason why footballers' salaries and transfer fees are what they are.
Mm.
And because, like you said before, we're so sort of anchored in being a footballing nation, maybe in some sort of attempt to keep up with the rapid commercial development that sort of, you know, worked its way into the brain almost.
Yeah,
Plus, maybe
yeah,
even
very
social
true.
media, that transfer fees, any post involving a sum in relation to football always performs better than those that are just words. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I think because people want to feel that they understand what's going on, they want to feel that they're on top of it. But ultimately, this is all stuff that is done in the dark, and it's about what people are earning, and they don't disclose this information, and it's actually quite dull, and it's irrelevant to what's going on the pitch, really, because it's all just numbers at the end of the day. How can you put a value on somebody scoring a goal? You can't really. How can you put a value on a left back? Right? You know, it's just you just come to an agreement with the a club, but that agreement. Transfer fees are often not the stumbling block for football clubs. The stumbling block is agreements with a player. Um, and you hear managers will say every now and again, they say, if the player wants to play here, then they'll play here. And players will often have their hearts set on moving to a football club, and they'll be on a list. Football clubs will often have targets of players that they want to sign, and they will move down that list if it doesn't work for any particular reason. But it's all a pecking order. So as an Everton supporter, the player you end up signing, you've signed them basically for several reasons, and why it's so difficult. If I think of a club like Everton, and I've seen why, in recent times we've had Manchester City challenging the Premier League and clubs like Villa supporting Manchester City's position, and people saying, why would they do that? The reason why they do that is because they are a club that has a billionaire owner who wants to push in amongst the top clubs and be in the top positions. But he knows the only way he can do that is by paying players higher wages and getting players into his club. So to do that, it has to change. It has to allow him more room. I think the Everton in recent years have sort of, in a weird way, said, we're going to try and push anyway. We're going to try and get ourselves into that scenario. But even if you do play a bit more wages for a player and get James Rodriguez into the club, is it the right fit? Is it going to work for the team? And that's where things go wrong. It's nothing to do with the transfer fees. Right? People add this up. This club spent this much on this transfer fees, and that's not what cripples the football clubs. It's the wages, and the players sat on those players. And if they're not playing, and this as an Everton supporter, you've had players at the club who have been signed, maybe not for a big transfer fee, but the wages have been just sat on there, and they've not barely played a game for you. Countless players. And I think that often harms players in clubs in Everton's position more than maybe Manchester United, for example, who can write it off to some extent. Everton cannot. It then means if those players don't work, then you go move 2 steps back. But then on the flip side, if it does work, then those bigger clubs will come in for them. So it's an endless cycle of that. I would say is my biggest frustration with modern football is the movement that clubs are not able to move through with maybe these. There's always been the big clubs, always. But you had those seasons. If you just look back in English football history in particular, the chances now, I know we had that miraculous season with Leicester, but you feel like for that to happen again, it was miraculous for the fact that it just doesn't happen. It just rarely happens. And I know we've had periods where Liverpool have been dominant and then Manchester United were dominant. But you go back through the annals and we've had league winners. Ipswich have won the league. Villa had won the league. Derby have won the league. And Wolves have won the league. And you just keep going back and we've had all these different... If there was a way that we could keep this wonderful league that we have, but just increase the variety in success of clubs winning things. I mean, Manchester City have had an incredible dominance, but going long term, going forward, it's not healthy really for the success of the league to have that. And actually, weirdly, it's been saved by how tight it's been, and that Liverpool and now Arsenal have taken them to the wire. But these are efforts that really, for those clubs, should have won them titles really in most other seasons. It's extraordinary. But they've also, them being there has made the leagues interesting. We want the Premier League to go down to the final day from an interest point of view. We don't want a team running away from it. And I think that's actually where City have weirdly been very fortunate in that they haven't, in all this run they've had, they've been pushed to the end by somebody and got over the line. But if I break it down and I look at it, and they've been a sure thing to feeling like a team's going to win something than I've ever seen. I can't think of a side that's been as dominant as them in terms of when you're watching the game and how good they are on the pitch. And as you can see, Max, I can go off on tangents about any direction with football. So you gotta stop me. You gotta put the right. Thank you, Seb. Thank you
Oh,
very
oh,
much.
I'm more than happy to sit and listen because I don't have these conversations near enough as I used to or as I should. So
Mm.
it's been a conversation that I've learnt a lot from. It's been incredibly valuable for me, and I'm very grateful for it. So thank you.